Hello. So, okay. So, hello, Dr. Aniket, do you hear me now?
I can hear you, but with some difficulty. Your voice is still very low.
Okay. So let me do one thing. Let me fix it. There's one option for this. I'll do one thing that it will be clear. Better, right? Do you hear me now, doctor? Aniket, it is better now. Do you hear me clearly?
I'm not able to hear you.
Oh. You're not able to hear me. What happened? Hello, do you hear me now? How about now? So how about others?
Yeah, slightly better, but still low.
Okay, so that means, how about now, Professor? Okay. Yeah, please, yeah, is it better now than before? Still the same. Okay, good morning, everyone. I think it's okay. Some technical glitches. It should be solved because at least we should be able to hear Dr. Aniket so that we can grasp the knowledge from him today. Okay, so I hope it's audible. I would like to confirm with Dr. Aniket again. Is it still? We hear you.
Yeah, now
Dr.
I can hear you
Aniket.
better.
Okay, okay. Thank you. So let's welcome today's speaker, Dr. Aniket Shule. So I was sharing before that we first met during April 2011 in Chiang Mai. That's the place from where International Olympiad on Astronomy and Astrophysics started back in 2007. We were also supposed to start from that year, observe and 2008, but there were some issues, the management issues, the other logistic issues, so we were unable to do this. So it took another 30 years for us for NASA to start astronomy Olympiad program in Nepal. And the only part, the good support is also from Dr. Aniket, who encouraged us to start it again during our meeting in 2011. He was telling this program should be started in Nepal. It's a really nice program, and he was regional coordinator of IOA, and now he's working as secretary of IOA, and he's also reader at Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education based in Mumbai. And he's an astrophysicist. He has very nice hold on this astronomical stuff. So we are very privileged to have him with us. Today's session. So if everyone allows, may I have permission to record this session?
Yeah, go ahead. No problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
So let's welcome today for our our speaker, Dr. Anil Techuli, for the special webinar session on celestial coordinate system. Welcome to the program, Dr. Anil. Please.
Hello. Sorry, I dropped out of the meeting by mistake. I will start. Let me start the presentation. What I have done, I have lot of slides, so I will not go through all the slides, or in some slides I will skip some of the parts. Can you see this screen right now?
Yes.
Yeah. So let me start the presentation now. You're able to see the presentation mode, or you're still seeing the slides?
I think you can present the slide. You should be able to do that. If any issue.
You're seeing the
slide. We can only
single slide or many slides?
Multiple slides. You can see multiple.
Okay. So let me figure out what happens. This is correct now? Now you're seeing single slide?
Yes. Now we can see.
Okay. So I will speak for about 45 to 50 minutes, and then I will take questions, or in between, if you pose your questions on chat, Suresh, you can ask the questions in audio, and then I will also respond in between also. So I have no problem in stopping in between if somebody has not understood something. Okay. So let me start with some basic terminology. First, let me just, I don't know what is the background of all the people here. So I'm going to start with some pretty basic things. Let me just take you through the terms on the left side. So first term I will keep using is something called transit. What is meant by transit? Transit is a planet like say Mercury or Venus. It is moving on the solar disk as seen by the observer. That is, suppose if we are on the Earth and if we see that a black dot of Mercury or a black dot of Venus is seen in front of Sun or on a solar disk, we call the planet is transiting. Then second term which we will use is called occultation. Occultation means moon or planets eclipsing some other distant object. So moon can eclipse some other planet or asteroid or something like that, or stars. A planet can also eclipse some star, and we call it occultation. Then a term, I'll show an example of occultation first. This is an example where Saturn is going behind moon. So Saturn is being occulted by the moon. Okay. Retrograde motion, that is outer planet, OP, I have put short form, outer planets, that is the planets which are beyond Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and so on. sometimes what we see is in the sky, they are moving backwards. Their regular motion is in one direction, but in sometimes they move in the opposite direction. That is called retrograde motion, and I will show a small animation as an example of that. So here Mars is moving in its orbit, Earth is moving in its orbit. When the Earth overtakes Mars, let me play this again. Yeah. So this is the apparent path as seen in the top. Both are moving ahead in their orbit, but Earth's speed is faster than Mars. So Earth overtakes at some point, and at that point, around that point, we feel like Mars is going backwards. So this kind of motion is called retrograde motion. The shape of this loop, which you see here, can be different in different cases. Okay, then perihelion and aphelion positions, again with respect to sun. Helion, the word helion means sun. So perihelion means in an elliptic orbit, the point which is closest to the sun. And aphelion means in elliptic orbit, the point which is farthest from sun. If your central body is not sun, it is something else, then you will not use word helion. You will use some other word. In celestial mechanics, as a general word, we use periapsis and apapsis. Okay, now let's come to diagram on the right side. On the right side, there is a lot of orbit shown. Let's take it step by step. Right now, two important things. Center of the solar system is sun, and this is our Earth. Okay, so now we are going to study this diagram with respect to these 2 points, sun and Earth. Now, let's take some planet which is inside Earth's orbit, that is either Mercury or Venus. So for this planet, there are various positions possible. One position is the Earth, planet and sun, they are in the same vertical plane. Vertical plane, that is the plane which is coming out of your screen. So that plane, they're in the same vertical plane. They may not be exactly in same line, they are in the same vertical plane. So this position where planet is exactly between sun and Earth, it is called inferior conjunction. The word is written here, inferior conjunction. On the other hand, if the planet is in the same vertical plane but beyond sun, this position, it is called superior conjunction. This is inferior conjunction, this is superior conjunction. Now, similar thing can also happen for outer planets. Outer planet, which is the planet which is beyond Earth and beyond Earth, that is Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, etc. It can again be in the same vertical plane, but beyond sun. This is called conjunction. Why there is no inferior superior? Because there are no 2 types of conjunction. Conjunction, the word conjunction means coming together. What is coming together? As seen from Earth, the planet and the sun are seen together. So in this case, there is an inferior conjunction that together but planet is closer. With superior conjunction that together but planet is farther. In case of outer planets, there is only one conjunction. Okay, so there is no question of inferior and superior. Somebody is annotating the image. Suresh, take a note, and whoever is annotating, just remove them from the meeting. This kind of thing we will not tolerate.
Okay, let me check.
Sorry, unmute myself, or I can see hear me. No. Okay, I can continue. now for the planets, outer planets, we have another interesting possibility is they are in the same vertical plane, Sun, Earth, and the planet, but the planet and Sun, as seen from Earth, are not together. As seen from Earth, Sun is on one side and planet is exactly opposite of that. So this is called opposition. So in this case, so in case of conjunction, the planet and the Sun will rise together and set together. In case of opposition, when the Sun is setting, the planet will rise. When the planet is setting, Sun will rise, roughly. This is a very approximate crude way of explaining, but roughly this is what will happen. Okay. Then, so this one line is very, all the positions I have explained. Let's go back to the interior of the planets. So for inner planets, now as this is one possibility that they are all in one vertical plane. But if they are not in one vertical plane, then we can define the angle going from planet, Earth, Sun. So angle subtended at Earth between planet and Sun. This is the same angle which we see in the sky, that is the angular distance between planet and Sun. And it is called elongation. The word elongation appears here. We'll skip the eastern and western elongation for the time being. So this angle is called elongation. For inner planets, there can be only limited values of these angles. That is, as the planet starts moving from this position this way, then the angle will keep increasing till some point, but after that point it will start decreasing again. What is that point? It is easy to figure out by trigonometry. I am not going to tell you the answer, you can figure it out yourself. For outer planet, again we can measure this angle subtended at Earth between Sun and the planet, and that angle now can take any value. It can be a very small angle. If suppose a planet is here, for example, then the angle is a very small value. If it is here, the angle is exactly 90 degrees. This is called quadrature. And if it is at opposition, the angle is 180 degrees, and then on the other side also. So angle can take any values. Let's move ahead. So for the to go and discuss coordinates, we need to define two cardinal circles. First thing, what we call as celestial equator. Earth has an equator, and if you project Earth's equator in the space, so a big circle exactly parallel to Earth's equator is what we call as celestial equator. So the celestial equator will be in a plane which is perpendicular to Earth's axis, and it will be equidistant from the North Pole and the South Pole of Earth. Okay. Now, but Earth's axis is slightly tilted. It is tilted by 23.5 degrees. So, if you take path of Earth around the Sun, then it is not going to be parallel to equator. As a consequence, the path of Sun which we see from Earth is not parallel to equator. So if you plot daily positions of Sun at different points of the year, every day you check where the Sun is on your celestial coordinate grid, then you get a circle. This circle is called ecliptic. Now, on this ecliptic, there are 4 points which are most important. First point is where celestial equator and ecliptic meet, and ecliptic starts going above equator. This is called vernal equinox. Vernal equinox happens around 21st March, And this is important point for our reference, which we keep using again and again. So between these two circles is angle of 23.5 degrees. Now, from vernal equinox, 3 months after vernal equinox, we come to the position where sun is farthest from the equator in the north. This is called summer solstice, and it is 23.5 degrees from the equator. Then this is autumnal equinox, and this is winter solstice. So this is again repeating the same thing quickly. Equator is projection of Earth's equator on the sky. Ecliptic is relative path of the sun for an observer on Earth. Ascending node, that is where ecliptic starts going above equator, we call it vernal equinox. Descending node is called autumnal equinox. And inclination of ecliptic is 23.5 degrees. All this I have mentioned. Next, we come to definition of day. All this is going to matter when we start calculating coordinates. So I'm just going through these basic definitions first. So day is defined in two different ways. One is our normal definition of day, which is a time between sun. Okay, in simple words, we can say time between two consecutive noons. What we mean by noon, sun is at its highest position in the sky. So this is, in technical words, it's called culmination of sun. Culmination means sun is coming to the highest position in the sky for that day. And that highest position can be different on different days, but for that day, we can define one highest position, and that is called culmination of sun. So in other words, noon. So time between two successive solar noons is what we call as one solar day. And this day is exactly 24 hours. However, if you take rotation period of Earth is not 24 hours. It is 23 hours, 56 minutes and 4 seconds. This rotation period is what we define as one sidereal day, that is one full rotation with respect to distant stars. So stars are practically at infinite distance. With respect to them, one rotation of Earth. Solar day is one rotation of Earth with respect to the sun. So what is the difference? Difference is, suppose the sun is fairly close to Earth and Earth is going around the sun. See the diagram here. So suppose Earth is here and there is a noon, so observer is exactly facing the sun. The Earth starts rotating and it is also moving in its orbit. So after one day, what happens is Earth is ahead in its orbit when it completes exactly one rotation. That is, the observer's line is exactly parallel to the line one day before. Then at that time, sun is not in front. Why it has happened? Because Earth has moved in its orbit, and it is moved by about 1 degree. You can easily calculate that by the fact that Earth completes full circle in 365 days. So 365 days, 360 degrees, about 1 degree per day. So to face the sun, Earth has to rotate further by 1 more degree. And at 1 more degree is going to take 4 minutes. That is where 24 hours will be completed. And when we say this is where 24 hours will be completed, that means the rotation period of Earth was 4 minutes less than that, exactly 23 hours, 56 minutes, 4.091 seconds, and so on. Okay. So, other important thing to note is when we say sidereal time is Greenwich means sidereal time at Greenwich. Greenwich is our reference meridian. If you are in Nepal, then you have to also add the time zone correction to find the sidereal time. Let's take some examples. Let's say what now. Important thing to note is Sun is at vernal equinox point on uh, on the vernal equinox day. Okay, and we define the local sidereal time is 00 when vernal equinox is culminating. That is, vernal equinox is at its highest point during the day or night, whatever. So whenever there is culmination of vernal equinox, we say the sidereal time is 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. Now on vernal equinox day, the equinox point culminates exactly at noon because Sun is also at the equinox point. So on vernal equinox day at noon, sidereal time is 0000. So noon of vernal equinox is midnight for local sidereal time. Okay, and sidereal day is shorter by 4 minutes. I would like you to calculate these numbers. Just note this down. We'll first finish the talk and then come back to these answers. So right now, just note these numbers. You have to calculate what will be the sidereal time on 20th April at noon, 20th May at 6 p.m. and autumnal equinox midnight. I'll give you 1 minute to write this down and then we will go ahead. So going ahead, again, I'm not going to cover everything. Like we have different definitions of year, we also have different definitions, different definitions of day. We also have different definitions of year. One is tropical year. What is tropical year? Tropical year is one full cycle of seasons. That is, we in Western calculations, we typically take 4 seasons in a year. In India, we take 6 seasons in a year, whatever number of seasons you want to take. But let's say start of the spring, which typically is taken from vernal equinox day, to next start of the spring. So one full year. So or Sun coming to vernal equinox once and then coming back to vernal equinox next year. However, this number is slightly different from what we call as sidereal year. Sidereal year is roughly rotation period of Earth. Revolution period of Earth. So one revolution around the Sun with its distant stars. Now, if you see the numbers which are put there, tropical year is slightly less than 365 days, 6 hours. Sidereal year is slightly longer than 365 days, 6 hours. We take our calendar typically takes 365 days, 6 hours as one standard length of the year. And how it matters, we'll come to it in a minute. Right now, important thing to remember, this period, 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, 46 seconds, which means it is 11 minutes, 14 seconds shorter than 365 days, 6 hours. So this 11 minutes, 14 seconds is something which I will come back to in a minute. This will skip. So now let's quickly go through the calendars. We had different calendars historically. There are some calendars which were purely based on phases of moon. So one cycle of phases of moon is 1 month, and then if you take 12 cycles, that is 1 year. That is how they calculate it. Islamic calendar or Jewish calendar still work that way. Whereas some other calendars, they don't care about moon complete at all. They just take 30 days as average length of the month. They put few months of 31 days, and they just have calendar like that. Our calendar which we typically use for international work, there is Gregorian calendar, is example of that kind. That it has defined 365 days in a year, but has really no connection with phases of moon. Then there are calendars which are mix of lunar calendar and solar calendar. It's called lunisolar. What is this lunisolar calendar? So Indian calendar, which was typically there. So the month was decided by the phases of moon, and year was decided by the cycle of seasons. To compensate the difference, they had to keep adjusting. What is the difference? If you take a lunar calendar, one lunar month is 29.5 days. So 12 lunar months is roughly 355 days, or actually 354 days. So every year there will be a deficit of 10 to 11 months, 10 to 11 days in a year. So in 3 years, you will have deficit of 33 days. Or in 5 years, you will have deficit of 55 days. So every 2.5 to 3 years, you have to add one extra month to keep your calendar in sync. And that is how Vedic calendar or Roman calendars were working. But this was creating a lot of problem. So Julius Caesar in 46 BCE decided one common calendar for the entire Roman Empire. There he decided that with the consultation of astronomers, that the year should have 365 days, an extra leap day every 4th year. So this is what we have been following still. So every 4 years there is a leap year. That means average year length is 365.25 days. That is 365 days, 6 hours. And as I said earlier, this differs from cycle of seasons by 11 minutes 14 seconds, which is 1 day every 128 years, which is not a big number by Roman life expectancy standards. Typically, most people died before the age of 50. So 1 day in 128 years is not a big number. But after 1600 years, this 1 day in 128 years accumulated about 10 days. Okay, so Vardhal Equinox started coming on 11th March, which is a big problem. They clearly knew the cycle of seasons is off. So Pope Gregory at that time changed the calendar, and he added this additional rules which said that you have to skip the days between 4th October and 15th October to bring the calendar back in the system, and then centuries at leap year only when divisible by 400. This is an additional rule added by Gregory. So the correction reduces 3 more days, 3 days out of 4 in 400 years. So accuracy improves to 1 day in 3300 years. And that is the system which we have been following. It is still not exactly matching with the cycle of season, that is a tropical year. It's still off by 1 day every 3300 years, but 3300 years is a long time. So we will worry about that a bit later. We will skip the time part because we have to now go to coordinates. Okay. So now, moving to coordinates. When we start discussing coordinate system, there are some terms which we will keep using. Zenith is the highest point in the sky. That is the point exactly which is overhead. On the other hand, Nadir is the point which in the sky is diametrically opposite to zenith. That is below your feet across the earth. If you just point your finger downwards and it passes through the whole earth, goes down, then that is Nadir. North celestial pole is the point along which axis of Earth points. It is the northern point along Earth diameter, perpendicular to the equatorial plane. That is, if you just take Earth's north pole and extend it in the space, that is north celestial pole. Similarly, you can have south celestial pole, and perpendicular to ecliptic, you can have north ecliptic pole, south ecliptic pole. Local meridian is the line along the sky joining zenith, north celestial pole, nadir, and south celestial pole. So basically a north-south circle. North-south circle which is passing through zenith is called a local meridian. A circle perpendicular to that is a circle passing through zenith, but passing through east and west is called local vertical. Now, in the case of celestial coordinates, transit means a star transited local cross the local meridian. Okay, and our angle is time since last transit. That is, if I say our angle of a star is 2 hours, that means it crossed the local meridian 2 hours back. Okay, this is how the motion of stars is. Typically, most of the stars, they rise in the to the east of north-south line, east of local meridian, and set to the west of local meridian. But there will be few stars which will never rise or set. So this star, for example, will keep circulating in a circle perpendicular to Earth's axis, but it will never set. Here, this star will never rise, which is very close to the celestial south. This same shown in this animation here. Some stars in the north which will just complete circle like that. South, some stars will rise and set just like that. The meridian will be exactly in between here. Or here the meridian will also be exactly like this vertical line. And most of the stars will rise to the east of, say, local meridian and set to the west of local meridian. Sorry, just give me a minute. Some reason open office crashed. Let me start sharing again. Okay, so we are back. Okay, so now with that information, let us go to the coordinate systems. First coordinate system which we are going to do is called horizontal coordinates, or sometimes they are called alt-azimuth coordinates. Alt azimuth. The first 3 letters from here, alt, and then this word azimuth. Alt-azimuth coordinate or horizontal coordinates. What this coordinate system goes for is two coordinates, altitude and azimuth. Altitude typically denoted by small a, azimuth by capital A. Now, what is altitude? Suppose this is your horizon. The gray plane which you see here in the diagram is your horizon. This is your north, east, south, west, and so on. This is zenith, this is nadir, north pole, south pole, everything is shown. Suppose there is a star here. The angular distance of the star from the horizon, as what is shown as by the green arc, this green arc is your altitude. Okay, and azimuth, this is measured in angle. Remember, all these numbers are measured in angles. And azimuth is as you start from north, go towards east, and measure where this altitude's arc touches the horizon. This red arc angle, full arc, is called the azimuthal angle. Now, this system is very convenient for people to use to plan their observation. They can decide, okay, this star is this much high, and in this direction, watch this star. But this system depends on both place and time. That is, if I do some observation in Mumbai and if you do observation in Kathmandu, they are not going to match. The altitude and azimuth coordinates of the same star at same time will be different. Or even for you, if you watch the star now and after 2 hours you go back and try watching the star, the coordinates will change. This means that the system cannot be really used for keeping logs of your observations. Okay. In this, sometimes people also prefer using a coordinate which is complementary angle of altitude. So zenith distance is defined distance from zenith, angular distance again. Z is 90 minus h. Okay. So now from these relative coordinates, you have to move towards absolute coordinates. On Earth's surface, we have one absolute coordinate system, that is latitude and longitude. Okay, so what is latitude and longitude? If people remember from the geography textbooks, we take equator and then take lines parallel to equator, and they are lines of your latitude. Then we take a reference line called Greenwich meridian, and then we find other lines which will again cross both the poles and they are perpendicular to equator, and we call them different longitudes or different meridians. So these are vertical lines of this sort which again all meet at a pole. They are called lines of longitude, and lines which are parallel to equator, they are called lines of latitude. Similarly, we have to define a system on celestial surface. We take a celestial equator, and on celestial sphere, we again draw lines parallel to equator. They become lines of declination. The word declination is used, and let me just go to that. Okay. So now this is your celestial sphere diagram. The vertical point is north celestial pole. This point is south celestial pole. Suppose there is some star here. What we do is from equator, we draw circles parallel to equator and find latitude of the star. That is called declination delta. And then we take a reference meridian, which is the meridian of or reference longitude of the vernal equinox point. This is denoted by the gamma. And from this reference longitude towards east, we measure what is the angle spanned by this meridian or this longitude. This is your second coordinate, alpha, right ascension. So declination is height from the celestial equator, and alpha is the longitude difference from the longitude difference measured from the vernal equinox. Now, the same coordinate can also be measured in some slightly different way. Here declination we keep same, and the second coordinate can be hour angle. Hour angle I mentioned briefly earlier. Hour angle is the angle time since last transit. It is called angle but measured in time units. Okay, so angle from the local meridian measured westward in 0 to 24 hours. Okay, so if I say hour angle is 0, the object is on meridian. It's not t equal to 0, it is h equal to 0. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead. This is how the RAD coordinates look. The system is called equatorial coordinates or RAD system. Or sometimes it is called alpha and delta system because this coordinate right extension is called alpha. The regular symbol for declination is delta. Now we have already discussed sidereal time. We have discussed hour angle. They are related with alpha in this way. The right ascension of any star is same as the sidereal time at that instant minus hour angle of the star. Next, we come to ecliptic coordinates. Ecliptic coordinates use similar system like equatorial system, but instead of equator as your reference circle, we use ecliptic as your reference circle, and instead of celestial poles as plus and minus 90 degrees, we use ecliptic poles as plus or minus 90 degrees. So ecliptic longitude is again measured from vernal equinox point, and here we measure it in degrees 0 to 360. Right ascension is, as you can see in this diagram, is measured in hours because we want to retain this relation. Sidereal time is in hours, hour angle is in hours, minutes, seconds. Sidereal time is of hour, minutes, seconds. So it is convenient to express right ascension also in hour, minutes, seconds, so that this linear relation holds. Otherwise, you have to multiply by some time constant. This system, ecliptic system, is very useful for solar system objects. Why? Because for most major solar system objects, they are almost in the ecliptic plane. So one of the coordinates, latitude beta, is nearly 0 for all of them. So as a first order calculation in ecliptic system, all planets, you can only work with one coordinates. Only for very fine calculation, you have to worry about second coordinate. So it works very, very nicely. Similarly, when we are calculating Earth's position and its effect on coordinates, that time the ecliptic latitude is not affected by any precession of Earth. And ecliptic longitude is only affected linearly by Earth's precession. So this ecliptic system has these two applications where it is much more preferred over equatorial system. One is solar system objects, and second is calculation for precision. Okay, so all this we just explained that these are the coordinates and so on. These coordinates, let's try to do some bit of mathematics. I will not do too much, just some bit of mathematics. So these coordinate systems, they are working on surface of a sphere. For this, our plane Euclidean geometry is not going to work. We have to use another geometry, what we call a spherical geometry. In this spherical geometry, we have slightly different terms and slightly different properties of various shapes. So we use a term for great circle. Great circle means any circle on the surface of the sphere such that its center coincides with the center of the sphere. So equator is a great circle. All longitudes are great circle, but other latitudes except equator are not great circle because the center, if you imagine the cutting the slice and taking the center of the circle, it will not be center of the sphere. It will be on the axis, but it will not be at the center of the sphere. So small circle are all of the circles on the surface of sphere. Spherical angle is angle between the planes of any two great circles. Okay. Now, if you draw a triangle on surface of a sphere, these are the properties. For a spherical triangle, all three sides are arcs of great circles. Any two sides are together greater than the third side. The sum of three angles is greater than 180 degrees, and each spherical angle is less than 180 degrees. The third one is interesting because in our plane triangles we say the sum of the angles is always exactly 180 degrees, but here we are saying it is always more than 180 degrees. We'll skip. We'll skip for the time being. We don't have time for this. Okay. In plane trigonometry, in your high school, you must have done that we use a sine rule for a triangle. If there is a triangle ABC with side lengths small a, small b, small c, we have a sine rule which says sine A upon A equal to sine B upon B equal to sine C upon C, and cosine rule which says A square is equal to B square plus C square minus 2BC cos A. In spherical geometry, this rules get slightly modified. Now here remember our side lengths in spherical triangles are also measured as angles, angular distances on the arc. So our sine rule is almost same. It says sine A upon sine A equal to sine B upon sine B equal to sine C upon sine C. Cosine rule is cos A is cos B cos C plus sine B sine C into cos A. Just compare here. It was A square is B square plus C square minus 2BC cos A. The form is similar but not exactly same. It says cos A is cos B cos C plus sine B sine C into cos A. And then the two more formulae which it is good to remember. You can get them in any spherical geometry textbook. I will not spend time on them right now. If you remember these four formulae, you can derive any other equation in spherical coordinates. So using exactly these four formulae, we can get a relation to convert from equatorial coordinate to horizontal coordinate. Suppose if I know declination and hour angle of a star, and we know latitude of the observer phi, then using this delta, phi and h, I can find at what will be altitude and azimuth of that star. Conversely, if I know altitude and azimuth A, and I know the latitude of the observer, then using these three, we can find delta and h. Similarly, we can do convergence between ecliptic to equatorial and equatorial to ecliptic. Again, you don't have to write this down. You can find this convergence in any book or even on the internet. You can easily find this convergence. I would especially like you people to actually start from these four coordinates, these four formulae, and try deriving these equations. That is the most important part. The more times you try deriving these equations or try solving problems by actually deriving the equations, it will work in your favor. Some consequences of these transformations and all this thing which we have discussed so far. Let's take an example of sunrise. We are used to saying sun rises in the east and sun sets in the west. What we actually mean is sun just rises east of your meridian, local meridian, and sets on the west of local meridian. If you define a particular point as east, this is 90 degrees from north, then sun doesn't rise there every day. Sun only rises there at that point only twice in a year. That is on vernal equinox day and on autumnal equinox day. In summer, sun rises to the north of the eastern point, and in winter, sun rises to the south of winter point, eastern point. And this is same shown in the animation here. This is summer, and this is winter. Oh, sorry, let summer finish. Notice these tracks are parallel to equator. So every day, sun takes a different track, but all those tracks are parallel to each other, and all are parallel to equator. Same is shown in this diagram. The rising points on different days. This is 21st March and 23rd September. We have plotted it for every 21st of the month. This is 21st April and August. This is May and July. This is June. On this side it is February and October, January and November, and this is December. All these tracks are parallel. And you can do this experiment yourself. You don't have to believe anybody else. You can get up early in the morning, take a picture of sun in different months. This is taken in January, and this is taken in February. In January, sun was rising somewhere here. February, it is rising somewhere here. Okay, so now question is how to calculate sunrise time. This was one of the equations which we used earlier, which we showed that this can be derived. Now, if this A is your altitude, that is how up the sun is from the horizon. When the sun is at the horizon, obviously A is 0. If you put A as 0 here, the same equation changes to cos h is minus tan delta tan phi. This is the equation which we use for calculating rising time of any star or sun or anything you want. So this equation you should remember. You did not remember all the equations, but this is something which you will keep using very often. Okay, all this calculation which we spoke so far is what we call as mean sun. What we mean by mean sun is not mean personality. It means it's average. What I mean by average? We assume the motion of sun in the sky is same throughout the year. It is moving with the constant angular velocity. Actually, you know, sun is not moving. What we are seeing this effect because Earth is moving around sun. So we are assuming that Earth is moving with the same angular velocity, and then these equations will work. But you also know Earth is in elliptic orbit. In elliptic orbit, no two positions will have same angular velocity. Actually, there will be parallel positions. But okay, so from day to day, the angular velocity has to change. Sorry for the typo. This is actually likha hai, but angular. So day to day, the angular velocity of Earth will change. That means day to day, the angular velocity of sun should change. So the actual position of sun is what we call as true sun. So the mean sun is what we calculate by our equations. True sun is what the actual position of sun is. That is the time shown by the sundial. So sundial gives you location of the sun. That is the actual position of sun. The difference between true sun and mean sun can be up to 16 minutes. Difference can be 16 minutes, and the reason for that, as I said, orbit of Earth is elliptical, and second is obliquity of the ecliptic, that is Earth axis is inclined to the ecliptic by 23.5 degrees. Because of these two reasons, the true sun and mean sun don't match. Difference between them is what we call as equation of time. So what is the effect of equation of time is we see something called a beautiful shape called analemma of sun. What is analemma? It is a shape created by plotting position of the sun in the sky as observed on the same place at same time on different days. That is, if I take my camera and stand, just keep it at one location for the whole year. Just adjust everything, keep there for one full year, and decide every 5 days or every 10 days, I'm going to take a picture of sun at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or at noon, whatever time you decide. Fix a time. Every 10 days, I'm going to take a picture. But the sun will not be at the same location. If you take all these pictures on the same background, then you see a nice shape like this. This is called analemma of sun. Every dot here is position of sun after some 5 to 10 days. So this analemma of sun tells you a lot about our orbit around sun. The shape exact which is formed, the size of the shape and exact nature of the shape, it depends on where your perihelion point is with respect to vernal equinox, obliquity of the ecliptic, that is the angle at which axis is tilted, eccentricity of the orbit, all these will decide where the shape of this curve. And I think that I will skip. So although it is impossible to get the exact analytical equation for this, we can approximate this by two major factors, which is Earth's elliptic orbit and tilt of Earth's axis. So Earth's elliptic orbit, if Earth's orbit was elliptic but axis was not tilted, then the correction every day which you have to do would be simply given by a sine curve, which will be like this. Then, if Earth's orbit was perfectly circular, but axis was tilted, then the equation will be given, the correction in the equation of time correction will be given by this red curve, which goes like this. And what you get together, these two major factors combined, is a curve which is like this. This is the actual equation of time. And the shape of the sun, so every day this is these many minutes you have to correct. And the shape of that analemma will be determined by this curve. Okay, with this I will stop here and then I will take questions.
Thank you, Aniket, for this wonderful presentation. I hope there are queries from the participants. So I have some issue at office connecting, so I hope you are hearing me clearly. If anyone has some queries, please raise your hand and you can ask to Dr. Aniket, please.
Yes, Sandeep Joshi has a question. Sandeep Joshi. You can type your question in the chat window in the meantime. I think Suresh is having some connection problem. Sandeep, you can type your question. There is a chat window. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat button. Switch on that, just click on that and then type your question there. Okay, the question Sandeep is asking is why revolution of the planet is not radiating energy. I'm not sure what exactly he means by the question radiating energy. Why there should be some, like, the planet is in the thermal equilibrium with sun, and it is just going around the sun because of the initial angular momentum it got in its during formation. So why there should be a question of radiating energy, I'm not very clear why the question should arise at all. Can you, if you want, you can explain what exactly you mean by that? Why you think there should be a radiation of energy? Okay. There is one question which was sent privately to me, which says concepts which we covered in the presentation, how much they overlap with the Olympiads. So the answer to that is for IAO, that is the one which is the smaller Olympiad, International Astronomy Olympiad. There is a lot of emphasis on coordinate systems, because the person who manages that Olympiad, he believes that this is one topic which even younger students can manage. They can learn about this. It is not very difficult, but it requires a lot of imagination, and that is what he would like students to have. So he is famous for designing complicated questions on coordinate systems and time and so on. For the bigger Olympiad, is IOA, there are always some questions on coordinate systems. Many times they're fairly straightforward. Sometimes slightly more challenging questions also come, but most of the times the questions are fairly straightforward. And even in the challenging questions, there are some sub parts which can be done at a simpler level. So when I talk to Indian students, I always tell them that if you think that a particular situation in describing the problem is quite complicated, first try a simplified solution. Get that answer. Get a feel roughly where you are headed, and then only try adding more complications. So Fahim has a question which says that what is the maximum size spherical triangle possible on a sphere? Is it really the equator? We're debating over this question. Okay, so the thing is, as far as you don't violate the given properties, you can draw any triangle we want. Now, I have not tried maximizing area of a spherical triangle, but for example, you take a triangle which is which has one corner at the pole, one corner at 0 degree longitude at equator, and the third corner at 90 degree longitude at equator. So that is a spherical triangle with 3 angles as 90 degrees. That probably will have the largest area. I have not proven that I have not done actually the calculation to prove this that this is the case, but this is my intuitive guess, and this will be sorry, not that one. As just less than 180 degrees as the angle at the pole, and other two angles as the 90 is my intuitive guess that will be the largest area possible for a spherical triangle. Next question is from Sandeep Joshi, which says every revolving body. Okay, he is trying to explain. Every revolving body loses their energy as our Earth revolves around Sun. It means it is also losing energy, so our Earth will collapse. So yes, what he is trying to say is during in this Sun-Earth interaction, is there a loss of energy? So now you have to remember, Earth is placed in near vacuum. So there is no mechanism. If Earth was in a stable orbit, then there is no mechanism for it to lose energy. In the examples which you are saying that a rotating body will lose energy, there is friction involved, or there is some other interaction involved which is making it lose energy. If there was just a system with one star and one planet and it is in a stable orbit, there is no way it will lose any energy in revolution. But there is not just one planet around Earth. Even Earth has a moon around it, and all the other planets are there in the solar system. They all also are exerting some force on Earth. So there is a small loss of energy in all these interactions as compared to the overall stability of the orbit. This is negligible, so you will not see a large change in the orbit in 1,000 years or even million years. But it is true that it is slowly losing its energy and slowly it will the orbit will change. Actually, there are also some factors which will help it gain energy, like solar winds. They come and hit Earth. That will also contribute to the gain energy. Sun is losing its mass because of the energy which it is producing, because of which Earth's orbit is gaining some gaining some distance from Sun. So there are lots of pluses and minuses, and together it will decide whether the final orbit is decreasing or increasing. You cannot just take one factor and decide that this is what will happen. You have to also take into account all other factors. Okay. Dharmanath has a question. We have Olympiad this following year. If not, okay. Okay, he's asking the status of IOAA this year because of COVID. My best answer I can give at this moment is I don't know what will happen. We are still waiting to see how the situation changes. By 15th June, we will take a decision what we want to do. We have not given any thought at the moment if we are doing the Olympiad or if we are not doing the Olympiad. If we cancel the Olympiad, what will happen to the participants? If we don't cancel, whether participants will get permission from their governments to travel. All those things we have not given any thought so far. So at this moment, the answer is I don't know. Suresh is asking why revolution plate will not radiate energy. The question I'm asking the other way is why it should radiate energy. There are no other losses. If you take a perfect system of just one star and one planet in a stable orbit, why it should radiate energy at all? That is the question I will ask other way. So Rahul is saying, please summarize again our angle. So our angle, as I said, is the time since last crossing of meridian for any given star, planet, sun, anything. If I say our angle is 2 hours, that means the star was at the local meridian 2 hours back. If I say our angle is minus 1 hour, that means after 1 hour, the star will be at the meridian. So at the rise of the star, typically, the our angle will be minus 6 hours or 5 hours or whatever, minus 5, minus 6. At the setting time, our angle will be 5, 6 hours plus. Okay, so it depends on that. Question from Sarthak Adhikari is why the sum of the angles of spherical triangle is greater than 180 degrees. That it will be probably. I will, as I mentioned in one of the earlier questions, we can have an example like if you take 2 points on the equator which are 90 degrees apart or 120 degrees apart, then take the third corner as the pole, you can easily get a triangle which can which will have angles each angle 90 or more. That means you will have total which is 270 or more. So you can easily construct triangles. In fact, it is if you take 3 great circles, you will always end up getting a triangle where sum is more than 180 degrees. Why is that? Is how the geometry will work out. Why? I don't know how to answer why. So Fahim says, as far as I found, some of the angles edges come to a plus b plus c is less than 2 pi, and angles should be between minus pi to 3 pi. True. Not minus pi. You take positive angles. Okay, Adarsh is asking why there is there any similarity between modern astronomy and Vedic era astronomy? Okay, so the thing is, superficially you can always find similarities between any two things. Like if you ask question whether there is similarity between some 2 random human beings, depends on what you mean by similarity. I can always say, okay, both have 2 eyes and 2 nose and 1 nose and 2 ears and 1 mouth and so 2 hands, 2 legs. They are very similar. But this is a very superficial way of looking at it. When we say that they are similar or they in the Vedic era we all knew a lot about astronomy and all those things, we are looking for something deeper. All civilizations knew that there are some stars. Egyptians or Babylonians were the first to find there are something called planets. All civilizations knew that there is sunrise, sunset, and then sunrise, there is cycle of seasons, and there are phases of moon. This is common everywhere. There's nothing special from one civilization to another civilization. What we do in modern science is we just don't rely on observations. We try to build theories on the observations. We try to test those theories by doing more observations. And if we are ready to discard the theories if they don't fit the observations. This kind of systematic investigation we have not seen in most of the early civilizations. So similarities in some sense, yes, there can be similarities, but actually meaningful similarities or we can say that Vedic civilization, Vedic astronomy was as advanced as the modern astronomy, then I don't agree with that. So Dharamnath is asking okay, books for IOA. Okay, there are many books on basic astrophysics which you can read. Everyone has their own favorite books. Some people prefer one type, some people prefer other type. So it all depends on what kind of books you would prefer. I like reading a book called by authors Roy and Clark. There are two parts. One is called Astronomy Principles and Practices, which is very useful because it covers all the basic topics. The second part is called Astronomy Structure of the Universe. That one I would say it will cover all the basics, but it is a bit outdated as far as modern information is concerned because it was written some 20-25 years back, and as modern astrophysics has changed a lot in last 25 years. But still, as a historical overview, that book will work perfectly fine. So, as both parts of Roy and Clark is a starting point, and then from there you can pick up whatever. There is Frank Shu, which is the physical universe, or Kaufman. If you're specifically looking at IAO, then Kaufman is quite good because it is also heavily based on visualization and not much on calculus. So Kaufman's book, The Universe, it is completely without calculus. Frank Shu uses calculus. The Roy and Clark also is mostly without calculus, but some calculus is used. And then there are books which are more formal and they use heavy calculus. So it all depends on what you would like. For spherical trigonometry, the best book is W.M. Smart. A textbook on spherical geometry. I think that is the name. But basically everybody knows the book by Smart. So those are the books. Ranjan is asking what are common topics to cover for IOA. I would say that you can just look at all the previous papers and you will know what are the common topics. I would rather say that what I keep telling the Indian students, if you are studying for the exam, then you are not going to go very far. You should never study for the exam. You should read astronomy because you like astronomy. And if you like astronomy and if you have read enough, you can automatically do well in the exam. Don't study for the exam and don't study to get marks. That is not the correct way to approach any competition or education in general.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Yes.
Good afternoon. Sir, I have a question. Every time during night time, I look at the sky and gaze toward it. And I had something amazing feeling that how much we have discovered, and does this all discoveries lead to a converging point or the discovery is diverging? I mean, the more we get into the subject matter, the more things seems to be chaotic. So, what is your views on?
I agree with you that there is every time we discover something new, we know how little we know about the universe. 30 years back, we did not know something called dark energy existed. And we thought the only big question left was dark matter. Now, then 30 years back, about people started talking about dark energy, or 25 years back. Then everybody started working on that. Now people think it is not just dark energy is not the only problem. The evolution of dark energy over the history of the universe is a problem, because the value of Hubble constant in the present universe and the early universe doesn't match. And so there are always new things to know. Even for sun, something which is as close to us and we can study it in very detail, we still don't know everything. So there is enough work yet to be done in this, and that is true not just for astronomy, for all sciences. If on some day we say that okay, for some science we know everything what is to be known, then obviously that science is dead. No more work can be done in that.
My point on saying this is that I don't know, but probably after some 50, 60 years, I may die and I even don't know who am I actually. This question make me invest my hours and hours thinking the same thing, that who am I, actually am I, and I don't know why. This is really amazing.
Yeah, your question is probably more suited for a philosopher. Philosophers have spent 2000 years in answering that question. So probably they can answer that question better than astronomers.
This too applies to astronomy, because yeah, how much universe have we actually discovered, you know?
I don't understand. I still don't understand what exactly you're trying to say. If you're worrying about your existence and your purpose of your life, then philosophy is what you should study, not astronomy.
Okay, so please.
Yeah, I'm moving to other questions. So Keshav is asking, what is the difference between astronomy and cosmology? So cosmology is basically study of the universe on the largest scale. When I say I am studying cosmology, we are studying evolution of the whole universe, evolution and the present status of the whole universe. We are not concerned about the individual objects in the universe. So we don't worry about each star, each planet, or even each galaxy separately. We are studying overall evolution of the universe. Astronomy is a wider area. Cosmology is one part of it. Astronomy covers everything. Astronomy covers study of stars, study of planets, study of galaxies, gas in the universe, and also cosmology. Then Akash has asked a question: in a spherical triangle, when is the arc equal to the opposite spherical angle? Good question. I can easily think of one case which is all three angles are 90-90-90, where their arcs are also 90-90-90, and you can, given the four equations, you can work out all the possible cases where this will happen. It's a good question to try out. I have not actually tried out, so I don't know answer offhand. But you can just use those four equations and put small a is equal to capital A, small b equal to capital B, small c equal to capital C, and see what answers you are getting. Then Rahul Ranjan, should we be only concerned about the plane perpendicular to the line of sight in spherical trigonometry? What about the plane parallel to the line of sight? Okay, so what we do in spherical trigonometry is we assume all the motions are in the surface of the sphere. It is true that all the stars also have velocities parallel to line of sight, and we call it radial velocities. But those the individual velocity of star, whether it is in the plane of the sky or whether it is in the perpendicular to line of sight, side of the or parallel line of sight, they are very small as compared to the effects which we see because of Earth's rotation around the sun. So as far as Earth's rotation around the sun is concerned, all the stars are practically at infinite distance. All the stars are practically stationary. Those are the two assumptions on which we can do all the spherical trigonometric calculations. If we have to take into account motions of individual stars, then we have to add corrections separately, and then we have to worry about all the three components, X, Y, Z. So you're right in that sense that we have to worry about all of this. Okay, Fahim is asking why we use Julian dates for data analysis. So thing is that if we for computers, it is easy to work with Julian dates because the number of days is just confounded by just simple subtraction. And so then it is easier to do calculations for computers. If we say that give me some coordinates coordinate of this star on say 1st February 1402, then for computer it has to do is it has to also remember that how many leap years it came between this and this, and then you have to remember that 10 days were skipped between infinity to, and then you have to find how many days have elapsed in between, calculate all that, and then decide what then calculate actually how much the star has moved. Instead of that, Julian dates makes life much easier. So in some sense, it is independent of the whims of calendrical systems of Earth. Okay, then the next question was why is cosmic ray necessary? How is their nature established? So cosmic rays are basically high energy particles which keep traveling through from different astronomical sources. We get cosmic rays from sun, as well as we get cosmic rays from other objects around the universe. We call them rays, but they are basically high energy particles. They are not electromagnetic rays in that sense. So cosmic rays is a misnomer, but we have observed them. So they exist. That is why they are necessary to be studied. I don't know what else to say in that. Okay, Dharamnath is saying, if the universe is expanding, then why we don't feel this in our solar system? Because according to this, our planet should move. No, the universe is expanding. That means the space between the massive objects, galaxies or galaxy clusters, empty space is expanding. That is, suppose if you are sitting in a classroom and teacher says, now I have to conduct an exam, so everybody increase distance between you and your neighbor so that nobody cheats. So you just adjust the chairs and in the classroom and make sure that there is more distance maintained between the students. That doesn't mean that you yourself have expanded just because your nearest neighbor has gone away. That is not because your size has got bigger. It is because the distance between the two neighbors, which remained of same size, has increased. Similarly, the expansion of universe is also increasing the empty space in between. It is not increasing the size of those objects. Okay, Sandeep is done. Then Akash. So, how to know in which case should we use vector form of gravitation and when to use scale? If all the forces are in the same line, then it is easy to use a scalar form. If the forces are not in the same line, but they are in different line along different lines, that is in the same plane or in three dimensional, even different directions, then you have to use vector form and then take components accordingly. Adarsh is asking, is looking at the sun during solar eclipse is more dangerous than other days? Obviously, the answer is no. Sun doesn't know that there is eclipse happening. Sun doesn't care that there is some tiny Earth somewhere and then there is a tiny moon, even tinier moon there, and there is the moon is casting a shadow on some part of the Earth. Sun doesn't know and sun doesn't care. So there is no reason some special rays will start coming from sun just because there is eclipse happening on Earth.
I can see that someone has raised a hand. Just looking through.
Okay. Then next question is, Rahul is asking, as addition to his previous question, that should we consider plane parallel line of sight for planets for precise output? Yes, if you precise means to what degree? Again, the question is to what degree. If you want to know roughly where the planet is going to be seen, roughly plus or minus few minutes, what will be rise time or setting time, or what will be time at which it will transit. And if you are happy with the accuracy of plus or minus 2-3 minutes, then you don't have to worry about it. Because as you go to outer planets, their motion is much slower than motion of Earth. So if you, for example, the orbital period of Jupiter is 12 years. So and orbital period of Saturn is 30 years. So Jupiter itself is like 12 times slower in the angular velocity than Earth. So the correction because of Jupiter's motion will also be less than 10% of your answer. So depends on what accuracy you are aiming for. You can decide to include motion of the individual planets also in your calculation. Again, as I said earlier in one of the other questions, if you feel that there is a simpler version and there is a more complicated version, first solve the simpler version, get that answer, and then add the second effect or third effect as a correction to the first answer. That way, even if you don't get time to complete your more complicated version, you will at least get points for the simpler answer. If you start with a complicated version and don't solve anything, you will not get any points. If you written something, you will get at least some points. Okay, then next, Anupa is asking, what is meant by sidereal hour angle? So hour angle, I have explained earlier. Sidereal hour angle means hour angle of stars. That's nothing different than that. Okay, I think I have covered all the questions so far. Suresh, I think there are no other questions.
It seems so. If someone still has some questions, please, we are at the end of the program. So if you have some questions, quickly ask. Otherwise, we will conclude this session for today. So if anyone has some questions, please write it down so that Dr. Hamid will try to answer. Okay. There is one question again about dark energy from Keshav. Keshav is actually the bachelor's undergraduate student starting at our province 7.
But I'm not the best person to talk about this. I can give you a 2-minute answer, but this is not area of my work, so my answer will be a bit simplified and a bit superficial. So the simple answer to this is like this, that we know, like 100 years back, Hubble showed that all galaxies are going away from each other. That means universe is expanding. And then people modeled the universe, saying that this is how the universe will expand. To explain expansion of the universe, you don't need dark energy. You can perfectly explain the expansion based on that, okay, initially there was some very big bang, and then because of that initial push, all the galaxies keep going away from each other. It's perfectly fine. What happened in 1990s is people discovered that not just universe is expanding, but the expansion is accelerating. There is earlier universe, the rate of expansion was slower. Now, rate of expansion is much faster. Which means not just it was that initial push, but even now, something is actively pushing the galaxies to go faster and faster and faster away from each other. The only way to explain that is, obviously there is no such thing which is actively pushing something. Only way to explain that is if the space between the galaxies itself is expanding, and it is expanding ever at accelerated rate. That will come only if you add additional term in the equations for the structure of the universe, and that is what we call as dark energy. Why it is dark energy? Because it works in some sense exactly opposite to the gravity, that it, instead of bringing things together, it is pushing things away, and it is energy which is seen in the empty space where there is nothing, no matter. There you see this energy. So we why is this dark energy like this? We don't know. It's still being researched upon. And as I said, this is not my topic of research. So I can't really explain what are the latest theories about nature of dark energy. For that, you have to talk to a cosmologist. Okay, there are many more questions. Maybe I'll take 2 or 3 more. And okay, so I'll take these 4 questions which have come. But after that, we'll stop there. So there is a question by Aman which says, has precision been taken into account now in the equatorial coordinate system as the right essential declination of the object explored? Okay, so Aman's question is that how equatorial system takes into account precision. So the thing is that because of Earth's precision, the coordinates right ascension and declination, they keep changing. So every 50 years, so we define coordinates of every star, that this star has this coordinate, this star has this coordinates. But every 50 years, we keep updating the coordinates. So typically, if you look at textbooks, you will see that the coordinates of the star are given with some reference date. Earlier it was reference date 1950. Now it is reference date 2000. If you open Stellarium, for example, Stellarium also gives 2 different coordinates, RAD coordinates. One RAD coordinates is for reference date 2000, and second RAD coordinates are as of today. So we have to keep worrying about change in the coordinates, but this change is much smaller. So again, for the first order calculation, this is enough.